Lord, I want to thank you again for bringing us together tonight. Thank you for each one that's here this evening. Pray that you would bless our time together tonight. And again, we just pray that you would also bless the YouTube broadcast as well. Help us be a blessing, encouragement to somebody through the YouTube broadcast this evening. And again, we just pray that you would be with those that are unable to be with us tonight. Pax of the Lord, just here about his situation. Just pray that you would be with him and encourage him and his family and friends as well. Father, bless now as we look into your word this evening. Pray that you would open it up to us through your spirit. Guide us, Lord. Help us to be able to be or to have understanding and insight into the scriptures before us tonight, as well as looking at what's happening in the world and relating it to the Bible as well. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Let's see. I got a couple of things here. If somebody would like some, these are things on issue 1, August 8th special election. I've got a few of these cards here. This is Vote Yes on 1. There's a website, voteyesohio.com, that has some information. Then this is Ohio Christian Alliance. This has got some information on issue 1. Then there's also, this is from the Ohio Republican Party, Protect the Ohio Constitution, Vote Yes on issue 1, and some information there. And this is from a group called Protect Women Ohio, which is, I think it's protectwomenohio.com. I don't see their website, but I think that's what it is. And that's some more information there. So if anybody wants some of these, we have them. You can take a look at them. Went to a thing last night. Secretary of State was there. The Treasurer of Ohio was there. Secretary of State Frank LaRose, and then Sprague is the was it Robert Sprague? I think it is the treasurer. Mike Ganadakis, who's the head of Ohio Right to Life. The one representative, I got it here somewhere, that helped push through the legislation in the House to get issue 1 on the ballot. And I know I saw it here a few minutes ago. And of course, now that I want it, I can't find it. There it is. Brian Stewart. Yeah, that Representative Brian Stewart was there. And of course, Chris Long, Ohio Christian Alliance, and all talking about this and really going over a number of the things of why it's important. We've been talking about this for a while. But it's an act of God that we got it on the ballot in the first place, because President Speaker of the House got his position when all the Democrats voted for him in order to they secured apparently a promise to keep this off the from being voted on in the House. But God changed his heart back there at the end of May, and it went to the court challenge, and the Supreme Court on a 4-3 ruling said that it is constitutional. They were challenging it because Ohio had passed a thing, I think about a year or so ago, regarding special elections in August. But the Ohio Constitution allows for constitutional issues to be voted on in August, and that means that it's okay. And the basic idea is that Ohio needs only 50% plus 1, which works out with the estimated number of voters in Ohio at about 50.00001% of the vote in order to change the Constitution. And as we were saying, that is why the U.S. Constitution is only about 7,000 words, which literally fits in your pocket. This has actually got the Declaration of Independence and some other material. And the Ohio Constitution would take up about a book like that, and it's about 70,000 words. And I forget the numbers. but the Constitution's only been changed 27 times, and amended 27 amendments. The Ohio Constitution is amended like just about every other year. It's had 120 or 100, was it 157 amendments? Yeah. So, and it's not as old as the U.S. Constitution. The Ohio Constitution also is privy to being manipulated easily. For instance, the amendment to put gambling in Ohio, actually, they put into that amendment street addresses for gambling casinos. When they tried to put marijuana in the Constitution last time, they tried to put street addresses in the Constitution where marijuana could be grown. And Neil had a great point Wednesday night. What if they change the street name, which happens from time to time? Does that mean you need a constitutional amendment, or the place can't do where it is? It'd be a great way to eliminate the gambling. Just change the street name. It's easier than amending the Constitution. Ohio is one of 8 states that requires a very simple majority. The simple majority was a thing that took place back in the early 1900s. The progressives, i.e. the communists, which were trying to promote communism worldwide, realized that it was difficult to change the U.S. Constitution because you needed 3/4 of the states to comply and different things. So they approached a number of states, and they were successful in getting a number of states to go from a majority, 2/3, 3/4, 60%, down to a simple majority. And they convinced them that it was a good idea. And the reason was because they knew that if they could do that, they could manipulate the state constitutions. And they were successful in a number of states. A number of states have realized the problems with it, and they've changed that, and they've gone back up to a larger majority, a super majority of sorts, which is what Ohio is now considering. This supermajority, and remember, we're not a democracy, we are a republic, and supermajority is actually to help prevent against fraud. That's why the United States Constitution requires 3/4 of the states. That's so you don't just get a few states to run roughshod over the rest. And it means that you have to convince a larger segment of the population that something's a good idea before it can be done, which helps protect against the ill-informed voter, helps protect against the misinformed voter, helps protect against the voter who really doesn't care. Because a lot of people get brought out to vote and they don't know anything about the issues they're voting on. They're told by somebody, go in and vote yes or vote no. And they don't know or understand the issue. They just do what they're told because somebody told them to do that. Yes.
I read of someone saying they live near Dearborn, or in Dearborn, where all these Muslims with their multiple wives, and they said these guys would bring a minivan full of all their multiple wives and hand them little strips, with their head towel things, and they all come in with those little strips of paper and dutifully check the box. They certainly aren't voting for the country.
Yeah. Just saw a thing here. Ohio Constitution has been amended 172 times. So that's a lot. The other thing that makes it even more important, though, for us, other than preserving the integrity of the Ohio Constitution, which is something that should have been done a long time ago, and there are people who have looked at it, but it's really come on the radar this year because of a series of amendments that are being proposed by the Democrats in Ohio. First of which is the abortion amendment, which is falsely portrayed as a women's health amendment. Who's against women's health? How can you be against women's health? It's not. It's basically an extremely liberal amendment, which would take Ohio overnight from being a pro-life state, where currently, because the heartbeat bill is on hold because of court challenges, so right now, no abortions in Ohio are allowed after 20 weeks. And you cannot have an abortion because you think that the child might have Down syndrome and a variety of other issues. There's parental notification. A minor girl cannot go in and have a student nurse or counselor take her in and get an abortion without parental notification. Just a whole bunch of, there's a number of other things that are there, requirements for sonograms and things like that, and all. But all of that would be done away with because the new amendment, if it's voted in November, means that the attending physician, which would literally be the doctor that's going to do the abortion, and the woman who's receiving the abortion can make whatever decision they want without state interference, which means abortion on demand up until the day of delivery with no parental notification, if that's what the doctor convinces this girl she needs. And it's not just physical health, it's emotional health that they're allowed to make this decision for. So right now, the pro-death people have close to 1 million votes, signatures on their petitions that they've been passing around. You may have seen them passing around a petition for women's health. They need only about half that number to have it on the ballot. They went for 1 million, or going for 1 million, to make sure that all the bad addresses and names and stuff that are on there that can't be verified, they'll still have enough to be on the ballot. So they're well on their way to being on the ballot in November. So all they have to do is convince under the current situation, all they have to do is convince a bare minimum majority. Minimum majority sounds like a contradiction in terms. Just the slightest of majorities, like I said, 50.00001% of the vote, that this is just women's health. Because it also, the language in the amendment says that it's women's reproductive rights, which this is what this means. And this is coming from the Secretary of State and others, not just anybody. What this means is that a woman who is told by her, or a minor, a teenage woman who is told by her counselor, her teacher, the local librarian, or whoever, well, the reason you're struggling is you're really a boy in a woman's body. They can go in and start them on transgender drugs, puberty blockers, and all kinds of things,
and surgery,
and even surgery with no parental influence or notification whatsoever, because it would only be the doctor, the attending physician, and the woman, with no state interference. State interference can be as simple as a state law that says that there should be parental notification. So as the one guy said, I think it was the Ohio State Treasurer said, I can send my note saying it is permissible for her to have an aspirin at school, but she could be turned into a boy without anybody knowing. And of course, this is
the other thing is the regulating. Remember they said that because it can't be regulated. Said you could have
you get, the example is you could have a pizza shop out front that does abortions in the back, because this says there's going to be no state regulation, which means you could do abortions anywhere. You could bring a van in, park it in front of the school, but you can have a pizza shop in the front doing abortions in the back, and the pizza shop in the front will be more highly regulated than the abortion facility in the back. Yes.
Does the abortionist have to be somehow registered?
No state anything. If a doctor says her as an RN can do the abortion, the state can't say anything about it. And if the woman agrees to it, okay, oh, hey, do this and do that. Doctor says it's okay. And the girl says, oh, okay. If the doctor says it's okay, state can't say anything about it. That's what the language permits. This is like coming from, the Secretary of State's office. And so this is not like right-wing extremists imagining things. This is what people in our top elected offices are saying. But most people do not know about this. They don't even know that there's an election on August 8th, much less what it is and what it's about. They're just simply being told lies, one of which is your voice is being taken away. Another which is that this whole thing, this issue 1, is a secret move by the left using people masquerading themselves as conservatives to take away your vote. What are some of the others there? Those, yes.
Someone said, well, we scared them so bad with our, those petitions, excuse me, sorry, that the HB 248 thing that failed, that they tried to turn into a constitutional amendment, that we scared them so bad with that, the swamp up top, look at the names of the people pushing this. The swamp is pushing this to keep we, the people, from having a voice in our own governance. We're cutting our nose off to spite our face,
Yeah.
They don't realize
So, yeah.
the life of the state is on,
Yeah.
If this passes, I might leave the state.
If what you mean the abortion amendment?
If the abortion amendment passes,
Not
so
the issue 1.
it's-
Yeah. And talking about how the swamp or whatever is trying to restrict people. Every pro-life organization in the state is behind this. They've actually all come together and formed a super alliance to support this, because the abortion amendment that's on track for being on the ballot this November is not the only thing the left has planned for Ohio. They also have planned for Ohio to put red flag laws in the Ohio Constitution, magazine size for guns in the Constitution. They want to put in the Constitution minimum wage, $15 an hour, which will recreational marijuana. These are all amendments. There's a whole litany of things that are coming, and they're basically raising money right now in the blue states to change legislation or to change the red states. And Ohio is a prime target because we are a key state. And so they are targeting Ohio. A lot of outside interest is targeting Ohio to get the abortion amendment on the ballot. Not only that, but also to defeat issue 1. So the people who are signing the petition are putting down their was it their phone number? I think it was their email address, their address, email address, which is also giving a huge mailing list or contact list to flood them with anti-issue 1 things and to basically try to make them think that issue 1's a bad thing. Now, everybody has to make up their decision on it, but my position is issue 1 is necessary. 1, to protect the Constitution, the integrity of the Ohio Constitution, but also it is to protect unborn children in Ohio. Because if issue 1 does not pass in August, it's projected that the abortion amendment will probably pass by 51, 52, maybe 53%, something in the low 50s. But the likelihood of it getting a 60% majority is extremely small. So it basically, it's going to amount to a turnout battle in August. So this is why we're mentioning it. And everybody gets concerned when churches mention it. Churches are absolutely allowed to talk about issues and actually advocate for issues. Even if a church is a 501 registered 501c3 organization, a church can actually put, and actually signs are for somebody else, but a church could actually put one of these signs in their front lawn. They could put it in their church bulletin. It's perfectly legal. But beyond that, it is a moral issue. This is our greatest opportunity to stop the abortion amendment in November.
We should vote yes on issue one.
Yes on issue one.
Absolutely.
And
if we're
people
not
say,
gonna
well, people are saying, oh, they're only fighting to get issue one passed because they want to keep the abortion amendment from passing. And that's a bad thing because, I mean,
Well, it's
that
not
is
only
one of the,
abortion amendment, but the other things that the left
yeah,
has
but
tried.
in the reason that all of the right to life groups in Ohio have united against, united together to back issue one is precisely to defeat the abortion amendment in the fall. So, as far as I'm concerned, if the only reason to vote for issue one is to defeat the abortion amendment in the fall, then that's extremely good reason to vote yes on issue one. If that's the only reason you can come up with, I think that's an extremely valid reason.
And I mean, if you have
It's-
these, and a lot of these, pro-life groups are doing great things, but a lot of them, are have a lot of people in them, a lot of unsaved Catholics who are doing it because it's the right thing to do. But shouldn't we, as truly born again believers, be the ones to defend life and protect, the unborn that can't defend themselves?
But anyway, I'll just finish this and we can move on to other things. But the a majority yes vote. This is basically the proposed constitutional amendment, elevating the standards to qualify for an initiated constitutional amendment and to pass a constitutional amendment proposed by joint resolution of the General Assembly to amend sections blah 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 of the Constitution of the State of Ohio. A majority yes vote is necessary for the amendment to pass. The proposed amendment, and this is what I believe is supposed to be on the ballot. The language. The proposed amendment would require that any proposed amendment to the Constitution of the State of Ohio receive the approval of at least 60% of the eligible voters voting on the proposed amendment. It would also require that any initiative petition filed on or after January 1st, 2024, with the Secretary of State proposing to amend the Constitution of the United States of Ohio be signed by at least 5% of the electors. And this is a key thing here too that isn't brought out much. 5% of the electors of each county based on the total vote in the county for governor in the last preceding election. The purpose for that in there is right now an outside interest can buy a mass media campaign in the Cleveland market, the Columbus market, the Cincinnati market, and really push something and get something on the ballot. In order to do this, they have to not only hit Cuyahoga County and Summit County and Medina County and Portage and Lorain and Geauga and Lake counties, but they also have to hit Holmes County, Guernsey County. They have to hit, Knox County. They have to hit Washington County. They have to hit all 88 counties have to say, we as a county think that this would be good for our state, which to me is a good thing when you consider that we're a republic. So require that. It also specify that additional signatures may not be added to an initiative petition proposing to amend the Constitution of the State of Ohio that is filed with the Secretary of State on or after January 1st, 2024, proposing to amend the Constitution of the State of Ohio. Yes vote is required for passage. So, this is, I think, like I said, it protects the integrity of the Ohio Constitution. It also brings because right now, basically, if you live in or Darke County, I think there's a Darke County, isn't there, out in the south near, but anyway, if you live in one of those counties, you have zero voice in whether or not an initiative can get on the ballot. Zero voice. So this will mean that every county in Ohio has to be represented, 5% of the electorate, of the electors, I should say, not electorate, 5% of the electors of each county based on the total vote in the county for governor of the last preceding election. That means if Cuyahoga County voted for the Democrat candidate for governor and the Republican won, the 5% would be of the Democrats because that's who voted, because that'd be the electors, because their county voted for the Democrat. But if it's a county that voted for Republicans, then 5% of Republicans. But anyway, those are some other things getting off into the weeds a bit. But yeah, it protects the integrity. It gives voice to the voiceless in terms of the counties that are currently really have no input on whether or not an initiative ballot gets on the for the election. And it's a protection of the voiceless, meaning the unborn children in Ohio. So, but we'll have some more materials perhaps later on as well. But this is an important issue. It is a moral issue. It is a life issue. And if we're not supposed to be salt and light advocating on behalf of the unborn, do we turn it all over to the unsaved and then complain that the unsaved don't do it? I mean, we ought to be salt and light. Like I said, if you can't come up with any other reason, the reason that it will hopefully protect unborn children in Ohio is a big reason. Yeah. No, that's okay. I'm unless somebody has questions, that's all I want to mention on that. Probably spent more than enough time.
For an announcement, if anyone saw the sign back there, but very shortly we'll be placing orders for more track materials for both the table back here and for the fair. I have a sample list of some that we thought of, and I have a little sample package of the stuff we would like to buy. If anyone has any input to that, see Pastor or myself, we'll probably place that order the next week or two, so the stuff will get here in time for the fair. Some list of places take 2 or 3 weeks to ship out. So.
All right. The last week of July. That's the Summit County Fair. Our church always has a booth there. So, all right. Well, we can move on from there. Yes.
Real quick, where is it? Which freeway do you take to get to Summit County?
Summit County Fair. Well, you would go down Route 8 and get off at Howe Avenue, probably.
How?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, yeah.
That would be the straightest from.
There should be signs from.
Yeah, and I
think they have a sign
when you get off the top.
Fair. All right. So, at any rate, with that, we can open up to anything else right now. Yes, sir.
While we were talking about our line, which is Jeremiah 2:34.
Mhm.
It pretty much puts it in your face. So to speak.
And of course, Jeremiah 2:34, also in thy skirts is found the blood of the souls of the poor innocents. I have not found it by secret search, but upon all these. That's the verse you're looking at.
Yeah. I think it's
The blood of the souls of the poor
talking about
innocents.
abortion for killing babies.
And yeah. And God said his blood cries out from the ground. And that's talking about, the death of somebody who's been murdered, basically. And God requiring some sort of satisfaction for that. So yeah, and it is. It's a very important issue. And of course, the other one is Psalms. In the Psalms, Psalm 139 there, and this is the one that very clearly tells you the unborn child is a child. It's Psalm 139, starting verse 13. For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. And perfect description of the unborn child before the cells begin to differentiate. At the moment of conception, everything's written in the book, which is the DNA molecule, which is written in a legitimate language. The DNA the letters are arranged in grammar. It has syntax. It has every characteristic of a language. It's not just random information that just happens to be there. I remember when I was in college and we were studying DNA in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of DNA that they said was junk DNA that was left over from previous evolutionary attempts. And as things changed, those things were kind of like just ignored. Now we know that all of that so-called junk DNA is vital DNA for all sorts of purposes. And it really is interesting, how, the
And it was because of this misunderstanding and bad ideas about the junk, that they thought that chimps and man are so close. They're not.
and the reason that and the way that they came up with saying that the chimpanzee DNA and human DNA was like, I forget what they said at one time, 90-some% identical. They eliminated all the junk DNA. So it would be like if you went to a Ford dealer who had some Subarus and some Chevys and some Toyotas on the parking lot, and you went over to a Chevy dealer that had, in addition to all the Chevys, some used vehicles, and they had some Fords and some, Toyotas and Hondas and things like that. And, if you eliminate all of the Chevys and Fords as junk DNA, both of these car lots are almost identical. We'll just eliminate, huh?
That don't make junk.
Exactly. And it's not junk DNA. When you compare all the DNA of the chimpanzee to all the DNA of the human being, we're really much, much further apart. I think it's less than 75%. I don't remember. I remember reading an article about it one time, but it might have been less than 60%. But there's considerable difference. But the only way they got that closeness was they eliminated all the junk DNA.
The stuff they miscalled.
Yeah. So yeah.
Somebody told me this one time, I don't know if you ever heard it or anybody, that pig's DNA is the same as human DNA.
Well, yes and no. All living organisms' DNA is the same as every other living organism. It's all the same molecule. It's like every book, these pamphlets, those song books over there, the Bible, the books that are over there. If you go over here to this place next door and you look at their advertisements and their magazines, they're all written in the same language. See, it depends on how you look at it. They're all the same language, but with the alphabet that we have, we can write a book over here talking about pigs, and we can write a book over here talking about human beings. It's the same language because it's the same alphabet. Not have basis in reality, because the DNA of a pig, while there's vast numbers of differences. Otherwise, a pig would look like a person, and a person would look like a pig. Now, it may be that there's some people who look like pigs, but and maybe some organisms. And they're not the same. There's too many differences in the DNA. The same thing is what they were saying with chimpanzees. Chimps and humans are the same DNA. Same thing. No, they're not. There's too many differences. And it's interesting too, because human heart, but their nose is not similar to a human nose. The nose is quite a bit different. An octopus eye is extremely similar to human eye, but obviously octopus arms are completely different than human arms.
Chicken hearts look a lot like little human hearts.
Well, that's because there's a basic format. Chicken hearts and pig's hearts and the hearts of a horse or an elephant or a human all have the same basic design. But just like a Chevy has a similarity to a Ford. Why? because there's a basic design to a motor vehicle. You have four wheels, you have seats, and you have a steering, and you have a gas pedal. Some people don't know that they have a gas pedal. You got stuck behind somebody today. And you have a brake pedal, but some people don't know you have a brake. You have a turn signal. Some people don't know they have turn signals. And you have an engine and I was going to say in the front, but if you remember the old Volkswagens, it was in the back. And you have a fuel that runs that engine. You see what I'm saying? But a Ford and a Chevy are completely different vehicles. They didn't evolve from a proto car. You know, Mr. Ford came up with his, and I guess it was Mr. Chevy came up with his, and different ones with different designs. In fact, I was just reading something that said that the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis, Mr. Ferrari was told by Mr. Lamborghini that he had problems with his clutch and it needed to be fixed. And Mr. Ferrari told Mr. Lamborghini that, well, if you think you can make a better car, go and do it. You're nothing but a farmer, mechanic, because he noticed that the clutch was the same thing that was on his tractor, because it's over in Italy. So I guess Ferrari made some tractors too. And so he said, okay. And he went out and he made his own car. He made the Lamborghini, which is considered a pretty exclusive car. Not that I'm endorsing either Lamborghinis or Ferraris, but it's just interesting. It doesn't mean the Lamborghini evolved from the Ferrari, is my point. It means that Mr. Lamborghini was given a challenge and he said, well, I can go do that. It's the same thing with Glock guns. The guy that Mr. Glock was a furniture maker, which somebody said that's why Glocks tend to have a boxy appearance. Mr. Glock was a furniture maker. And he was dissatisfied with some of the guns. And so he decided, well, I can make a better gun. And he went out and did it. It doesn't mean that a Glock evolved from a Smith & Wesson, or something like that. Of course, I have it on good authority from the Oval Office itself that if you put a pistol grip well, it does two things. Pistol into a gun, and it enables your 38 to fire a 45 caliber bullet now. I would imagine with the right pistol grip, you could fire a 30 caliber bullet out of your handheld pistol. It's the most ridiculous things. If you haven't followed that, Biden was saying that a pistol grip makes your pistol into a gun, which what was it before? If it's not a gun, then I guess it's not covered by any of the gun laws because it's not a gun. But silly us, we thought they were guns. And the caliber has to do with the size of the barrel. So if the barrel can only let a certain size bullet through it, and you put a pistol grip on it, like if I tried to fire a 45 round through a 38 barrel, assuming I could get it in there somehow to fire, let's assume that I could do that. Anybody see a problem with putting a bullet that's too big for the hole and propelling it with excessive force into that right in front of your face?
The ATF should all do that.
Give them all pistol grips and tell them, put 45s in your 9mm. Anyway, we digress. But what I'm getting at is just because there's similarities don't mean things evolve from something. In fact, when they began devising the whole classification of animals and plants and everything like that, Linnaeus, who believed the Bible, I don't know that he was a born again Christian, but he believed the Bible account of creation. And he did not set out to decide how things evolved into certain things. What he did is he looked at different organisms and he said, these have similarities. So I will group these things all together here. Here's a group of organisms that have scales and lay eggs. And here's a group of organisms that have hair and give birth to live animals for the most part, live babies for the most part. And so they made this group reptiles and also birds, because they got, if you look at their legs, they got like little scales. And then there's fish. So there's some other groups over there, but they're not mammals. they grouped them by similarities, and then they grouped subgroups of different types, and he basically put things together on the basis of how close they look to each other. So when he came out with his classification system, it wasn't based on the idea of evolution. It was based on the idea of special creation, that God created certain things similar. For instance, you have, like, if anybody's familiar with mint, I was going through a garden center one time, and they had apple mint, they had pineapple mint, peppermint, spearmint, cat mint, which is supposed to be different than catnip, and lemon mint, and all kinds of mints. And mint all has a square stem and opposite leaves, and it usually has menthol in it, and that's one of the characteristics. But there's another thing very closely we call related to mint, which in a sense is an awkward term because it implies that they are related, like you have a cousin, you have similar features to your cousin because you stem from a common, ancestor, common grandparents. Well, thyme, the THYME. There's lemon thyme. There's slow thyme. No, there's all kinds of thyme, different aromas and everything. It also has square stems and opposite leaves. And it's aromatic, just like mint is, but it doesn't have the menthol like mint has. And so it's classed into a different group, thyme, mint. But they're like two different genuses. I think they're different genus, but they're in the same family, the mint family. Not because Linnaeus thought that they evolved from the same plant, but because they were similar. Square stem, aromatic, opposite leaves. Well, we'll put all these square stem, aromatic, opposite leaf plants here. And then some of them have menthol, so we'll put them here. And he just subdivided like that. And some of it's been changed around and everything. And then, of course, when Darwin came on the scene, everybody came up with this brilliant idea that why they're similar because they stem from common ancestors. But that's not what Linnaeus thought when he developed the system initially. He believed that God created things and he used common patterns. It's just like I said, the human eye. When God created the octopus, he gave the octopus an eye. The octopus, as a sea creature, was not created on day 6 when Adam was created. It was created, the sea creatures, weren't they on day 5? Or not day 5, day 4, I think it is. Let me take a look here. Sea creatures were on... Oh, it was day 5. I was right in the first place. Yeah. Sea creatures were created on day 5. So when God created Adam and he designed the eye that Adam has, he said, you know what? Here's this eye that I put in the octopus. It's pretty good. It would work for Adam. It's like taking parts out of a bin and saying, hey, that'll go in here. What about when he designed the platypus? Well, let's see. We got the tail of a beaver tail, right? And we got a duck bill over here. We get some web feet from the ducks as well, and spare parts. And just to make everybody really whacked out later on, we'll make it lay eggs. Yeah, yes, exactly. So anyway, there's it's interesting. There's other reasons why a platypus is a mammal, though, and not a reptile or some other weird thing. But yes.
Yeah, I think about in this day and age when everything is racist, 2 equaling 4 is racist.
Yep.
What these people would think, they knew that Darwin thought that the savage races like Eskimos, American Indians and such, were closer to monkeys than they were to white people or Asians, and so on and so forth. I mean, how would they make excuses for that? And the fact it was science.
In the late 1800s, I'm not sure how long it went on, the Bronx Zoo had a guy who was a pygmy from Africa. black man from Africa, from Pygmy tribe. Pygmies were shorter people. And his job, he lived at home. He would report for his job at the Bronx Zoo, where he would sit in a cage all day long over where the monkeys were and be on display as a primitive precursor to man.
Acting primitive.
Oh, I don't know if he sat there and read the paper or whatever, or play, didn't have TV or anything, or radio. So I don't know what he did all day, but he sat in the cage. In Australia, because of Darwin theory, the Aborigines were thought to be subhuman. Some of the early missionaries into Australia did not believe that Aborigines had souls. They thought they were primitive organisms that had not yet evolved a human soul. Well, these people hadn't evolved yet a understanding of the scripture, and they actually captured Aborigines and displayed them in zoos. I think in Sydney, Australia, also in London, and they would kill Aborigines as well, like you would kill rats. They're in the way.
They're a lot like the American West, our history of the West. They exterminate the Indians.
Well, and so what we had with the rise of Darwinian thought is the darker the skin and the curlier the hair, the more primitive, and the wider the face, nose and things, the more primitive they were, less advanced. Hitler's master race, the Aryan, blonde, blue-eyed, was considered the pinnacle of human evolution. That's why it was the master race. Over in Japan, they thought the same thing. What's that?
Hitler didn't have blue eyes.
I know, that's the ironic thing. Over in Japan, they also thought the same thing, that the Japanese were the pinnacle of human evolution. Everything else was inferior. That's why you could treat these other people and other racial groups terribly, because they're subhuman. And unfortunately, some of the liberal theologians of the day embraced Darwinism, and I was just thinking of that, embraced Darwinism, and they taught this. These are subhuman. They didn't have a soul. Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, Kim showed it up here, and I was going to look it up myself. But if you go online, you look up, anybody ever seen those famous pictures of the ape basically walking on his knuckles and then slowly standing up to the guy holding the spear, just walking? You ever notice something about them? You can find these online. She just found one. The more primitive they are in that, the more ape-like, the darker the skin. And as it becomes progressively upright, walking upright, the skin gets lighter. You know where that comes from? That's Darwinism. Darwinism teaches that. Darwinism teaches that these other races are not yet evolved to the extent that some others are. And so Darwinism justified Hitler's master race teaching, justified the Japanese position. It justified Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, who said we need to get rid of human weeds, which were black and brown people. Now, the reality of the biology is black skin and white skin. The darker the skin is and the lighter the skin is, the more extreme we are in the genome. The more center is brown skin. That's the more natural color. Going to the lighter or the darker side is getting away from the genetic center. They're extreme. For instance, red hair and fair skin and freckles, that was a mutation that occurred amongst I think it occurred first noted in Scotland, and mostly people who had some Scottish and Norse ancestry. But it was a mutation So red hair and fair skin was a genetic mutation. It wasn't something that naturally occurred until something went haywire with some of the genes. And it also, I guess, reading about the mutation carries in most people who have it, a higher pain tolerance, oddly enough, than what most people have. It's linked with the red hair gene. But so in the first generation of children, because we look at Adam and Eve, and I remember in Samoa some kids saying, we were talking about Adam and Eve, saying, what do you think they looked like? And of course the Samoans, having a medium brown skin, they said more like me, having lighter skin. And I asked one why, and said because it's in the Bible. They had a picture in the Bible of a white Adam and Eve. You'll see pictures drawn of Adam and Eve with white skin and blonde hair, even, and blue eyes. Those are not what they would have looked like. Adam and Eve likely were both medium brown with darker hair, and they carried within them the dominant and recessive of every gene that influences your hair color, your eye color, and your skin color. And so in that first generation, they could have had children that were everything from very light colored skin with blonde hair and blue eyes to very dark colored skin with black hair and dark brown eyes, and every variation in between in that first generation. And it would not have been abnormal. A family in England who had fraternal twins. So they know that it's the same mother and it's the same father. When the two girls were born, one girl had very fair complexion and blonde hair. The other girl had a very dark complexion and black curly hair. How did that happen? Well, it's because the one of the parents at least had Jamaican ancestry. And even though, what was it? Were both parents white? I think it was, or both parents looked white, but they have a daughter who, if you put her in with some black children, you would have thought that's what she was. And when the two girls were together, people didn't believe that they were sisters, let alone twins. But it's just the way the genetics work. The mother and the father had the dominant and recessive combination that was able to produce, in a set of fraternal twins, a very fair complected light-haired child and a very dark complected dark-haired child at the same time. Amazing. We can see that happening occasionally today. So why would that be a strange thing for Adam and Eve to have that happen? But then, of course, the Bible says, where is that in Acts? We're all of one blood. Let me find that here. Oops, I just went away. I should have that. I think it's Acts chapter, is it 4? Not 4. That is Acts 17. I don't know why I was thinking 4. Acts 17, verse 26. Hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath determined a time before appointed and bounds their habitation. And that's in a larger sentence there where Paul's talking about on Mars Hill and all that, and talk about God. But made of one blood all nations of men. And that's why when it comes to getting a blood transfusion, it does not matter the skin color, eye color, hair color, the person you're getting the blood from. It just matters, do you have the same type? And if your RH factor is positive or negative, if you got a positive RH factor, you don't want, a negative RH factor, you don't want to get a positive RH factor blood. So, we're all the same inside. Everything is just exterior differences in terms of our appearance. Some people have a higher concentration of melanin, for instance, and others have a lesser concentration. And there's other pigments and things that affect the color of the skin. But yes.
I was looking at the dates to see if it could be associated with Darwin, but it's really a little bit early, that the Mormons are, they have their,
Oh,
they got
what is it?
into-
The Lamechs that they had that had the dark skin. Yeah, the Mormons, and it's in the Book of Mormon, where the Book of Mormon basically says, if you reject Mormon doctrine, your skin you'll be cursed with dark skin. If you accept Mormon doctrine, you'll have light skin. It even goes on to say that if somebody has dark skin and they embrace Mormon doctrine, their skin will be made light and delightsome. The original text said white and delightsome. But so here's the thing. When Kim and I were in Samoa, and I think I mentioned this once before, the Mormon missionaries wouldn't talk to us, the active ones, but ones who had been Mormon missionaries would try to challenge us. And I had those verses from the Book of Mormon on index cards I would keep in my pocket. So when we ran into them, and I would hold my arm, because the underside of your arm is the lighter part, as opposed to the top side where you get more sunlight on it. And so I would hold that next to the top side of their arm to get the best possible contrast. And I would say, well, if the Book of Mormon is supposed to be the most correct book on earth, which they assure you that it is, why, since I reject Mormon doctrine, is my skin light and you who accept Mormon doctrine have dark skin? When the Book of Mormon, the most correct book on earth, says that the one that rejects Mormon doctrine would have dark skin and the one that accepts Mormon doctrine would have light skin. They didn't really like that because the most correct book on earth was being visibly shown to be wrong. And more often than not, they would try to change the subject or say, well, I bear you my testimony, which when I was doing some research into how to witness to Mormons, they said, if you're talking to a Mormon, you're trying to witness to them and they go into that, he said, you've hit something that's rattled them. And they do that, if you're familiar with the term centering, to center themselves back into what they believe to be real, because you have shaken them. And he said it's almost like a form of self-hypnosis. And he said if you're witnessing to a Mormon and they start that I bear you my witness nonsense, or my testimony, that's right, bear you my testimony, he said interrupt them. He says, because if you let them do that, they'll center themselves back in what they believe to be real, and you'll lose the advantage that you just got. He says you interrupt them and you keep them from recentering themselves, and it puts them off balance, and it sets up a little dissonance in their mind, that, wait a minute, I mean, the Book of Mormon, the most correct book on earth, which I know to be true. I just know it because I had the indigestion, the burning in the bosom. And yet his arm is lighter than mine. Why is that? But if you allow them to center, they just move on like it never happened.
Do the Mormons consider themselves Christians, to be Christians?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They call themselves the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
How can they deny the divinity of Jesus and say they're Christians?
Well, they do and they don't deny the divinity of Christ. They say that he was elevated to godhood. Because see, what they deny though is that Jesus is God and Jehovah are the same. They deny God, who was once a man on the planet Cobalt, I believe it was, followed his God, and Jehovah embraced basically Mormon doctrine. And because he was so dedicated to the truth as they knew it, as they say it is, when he died, he became the God of his own world, which is the earth. And so Jehovah God came down to the earth to one of his subjects, Mary, and basically produced a child in the natural way, not what the Bible says. But basically Jehovah God came down, impregnated Mary, and then Mary bore a son who was Jesus. So Jesus is the physical son of Jehovah. And then Mormonism teaches that you as a man, if you embrace Mormon doctrine and you're dedicated sufficiently, when you die, you also can become a god. and have your own planet.
Right.
And then if one of your subjects is faithful enough, when they die, they can become a god and have their own planet. You get to be eternally pregnant. Isn't that a joy? Eternally pregnant, producing the spirit babies that are going to inhabit the people who are born on. That's what's going on. They teach that Jesus and Lucifer were brothers,
Oh, that's blasphemy.
and that Jesus was the elder brother. Jesus and Lucifer presented two plans for, basically redeeming human beings. And Jehovah liked Jesus better than Lucifer's. So Lucifer became angry and his skin became dark. This is where dark skin comes from, according to Mormon theology. His skin became dark, and a third of the spirit babies, who are the angels, before they become embodied in a person, a third of the angels rebelled with Lucifer against Jehovah. And they were cursed with dark skin as well. And they were cast down to the earth. And of course, when they were born into human beings, they all had dark skin. And so human beings that are born, if they reject Mormon theology, their skin will become dark. If they embrace Mormon theology, their skin will become light. Now, there's no documented evidence of this that I know of. I don't believe anybody's ever proved this, but they say it nonetheless, because the most correct book on earth says it. Yes.
I thought it was that when you live in an area where there's less sun, you get darker skin. Because like when Noah's three sons, Ham went to the part of Africa that was near the equator, his grandson.
No, it's not from. Well, I mean, if you're out in the sun more, your skin will get darker to a degree because you tan. It's because the skin produces more melanin, but you only have a limited capacity of how much additional melanin you can produce. Some people produce more. For instance, I had a friend when I was in college. He was part American Indian and part Dutch. In the wintertime, he would be almost as light as Kim. In the summertime, he would get almost like a coffee brown color when he would be out in the sun.
Rich Corinthian weather.
Yeah, he really got a very brown skin in the summertime. But then in the wintertime, out of the sun, his skin would turn very light again. Kim, on the other hand, when we were in Samoa for several years, German tourist stuff from one of the cruise ships that came through, thought Kim said that she'd only been there 3 months rather than 3 years, and said, well, dearie, when you've been here a few years or whatever, you'll be just as dark as the rest of them, to her. It's like Kim was not going to get any darker because she'd maxed out at how much melanin her skin could produce, which wasn't much. And the Samoan people say that if you drink kava, which is it's a root that they steep in water, and I think it's related to pepper, like the pepper that peppercorns, but they drink it for various things. But people who have to work out in the sun like to drink it too, because it gives them, they say, the greater ability to withstand working in the sun. And they also say it makes your skin darker. Well, it's because you're in the sun more. They're skin tans, and so you have this variation. So what happened is, after the flood, and specifically after the Tower of Babel, when people began to scatter, some people had natural ability to produce darker skin, and some people had natural ability to have lighter skin. People with lighter skin, when they migrated further north, into the temperate zones where you didn't get as much sunlight, remember your skin, vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin, your skin produces it when you're in the sunlight. They put vitamin D in milk. Why? Because, a lot of people are out of the sun. If you have lighter skin, you can produce vitamin D, which is very helpful in resistance to diseases, amongst other things, with less sunlight than people with darker skin. So people with darker skin typically stayed in the more tropical regions where, you had more sunlight, so you could remain healthier. But the other thing was the extra melanin content also helped protect the skin because of the more sunlight that you were in. Now you have some exceptions. I was going to say, if for instance, some of the Inuit and Eskimo type peoples who live very far north have darker skin. How are they exceptions to the rule? Well, it's because their diet is high in seal and whale and such not blubber, which has a lot of naturally occurring vitamin D in it. And so people with darker skin today can live very healthy lives in northern climates because you got this magic thing called a vitamin D supplement. You pop a little thing out of the bottle and take it. And you got milk that's got vitamin D and all kinds of stuff. Yes.
I thought they put the vitamin D in milk to enhance the calcium. I think it helps you.
Well, it probably helps absorb calcium too, but the vitamin D is good for you. But because you're getting vitamin D in your milk, people with darker skin can live in areas where the light is not as intense. And it's just, there's a lot of things going on like that. So people sorted themselves out. They didn't get darker skin because they lived in the tropics and lighter skin because they lived in the northern climates or, further south below the equator, the temperate zones. It's just that because of health challenges and things like that, people with darker skin tended to there's exceptions to everything, tended to concentrate in the more tropical regions, and lighter skins tended to concentrate in the more temperate zones. But there's a lot of exceptions.
People thrived in the tropics and the lighter skinned ones thrived.
Yeah, the lighter skinned people had greater trouble in the tropical zones because the skin would burn. You'd have all kinds of problems. You didn't have as much melanin to protect your skin. So they tended to move into the temperate zones. And so that's what happened is people settled into those areas. You had isolated gene pools. So in the tropical zones where you had a preponderance of darker skinned people, you gradually lost the genetic, information for light skinned because everybody that had the genetic code for darker skin was intermarrying with people with the genetic code for darker skin. So you had darker skin. People in the temperate zones lost the darker skin because everybody that was there pretty much had lighter skin. So they married people with lighter skin. So you lost the genetic information. So lighter skin and darker skin is actually due to a loss of genetic information, not an addition. And that's why, brown skinned people have probably greater genetic information or diversity. But go ahead.
There was a teacher at Cleveland State saying, this was about 7 or 8 years ago, I was in the class, and she said, I don't know if she was talking about anthropology or what, but it wasn't anthropology class. It was like she also taught something again. And by the year 2050, she said that people are all going to be the same color. It's going to be like the California sunshine, California suntan.
Well, basically, if you took everybody and intermingle people, if you take someone with light skin and they marry somebody with dark, children are going to be more in between wise. And if those children marry other children who are of the same color, it's going to produce more and more. And so gradually, it's just like if you had paint and you had a bucket of paint and you poured in this and you poured in, get this brownish color, no matter what you do, really change it. It all becomes a brownish color because when you mix all the dominant recessives together, eventually you're going to get a brown skin color. So what you're doing is you're mingling all that information back in. So, yeah, and you'll always get some variation, obviously, because of the quirks of but yeah, with people intermingling, there used to be a lot of separation in terms of people where they live. They just didn't intermingle much. And then there were societal things against it, which largely are disappearing. And so as a consequence, you see children that are,
Well, it's a lot
having
easier
browner
to
skin.
move now.
Yeah, it's a
mean,
lot
you-
easier. That's a very good point. It's much easier to move now than it was before.
I mean, you can
And,
be across the country in 2 hours.
You can be around the world in a few hours, in a couple of plane, flights, and you're around the world, and you can relocate. You can go all over the place, and brown skinned people, medium brown sort of. You could see the influence there. For instance, we knew a family that they had a significant amount of Japanese influence in their family, and certain Japanese characteristics would show through in the children and the grandchildren. And then of course there were some Samoan families that married white people and married black people and married this group and that group. And it was kind of interesting. You could see these variations in them. And so in some Samoan families, because of the influence, for instance, of like the Japanese and the Koreans and Chinese, you had lighter skin, and Americans, for instance, North Americans, you would have children, Samoans, that would have a lighter brown coloration. And then you had other Samoans that had, some influence of blacks and American Indians and like Solomon Islanders and all, which are another group of people as well with very dark skin. And so you would have some Samoans with darker brown skin. And then you had some that were more just Polynesian, who were more in the middle. And some families, there were some families where there would be a considerable variation between light brown, medium brown, and dark brown amongst the children in that one family. So you will get a lot of mingling, but again, we're all human beings. We're all of one blood, and God created us all, but he created the genetic variations so that all of these different colors can be produced. God didn't have to do that, but he did it because he wanted variety. It's just like, why are there flowers that are white? Some are blue, some are red, some are orange, some are yellow, some are pink. Why didn't God just make a flower? Let alone different colors. Sometimes the same flower, like a rose, has a wide variety of colors possible.
I don't worry about it.
Yeah, if you're colorblind, it doesn't make any difference. But do you see what I'm saying? It's why did God put variation in? Well, for the same reason that when an artist picks up his paint and he doesn't just paint in the primary colors, he mixes colors, and he doesn't just, okay, I want this to be red, but I don't want it to be red. I want it to be kind of an orangey red, or I want it to be kind of red with a little brownish tint to it. Or I want it to be red with a little bluish tint to it, like a purpley red.
Great artist and a great engineer.
Exactly. And God combined both, great artist, great engineer. And so he had a vast array of things in his toolbox to be able to devise everything. Why did he just make one animal that's an herbivore? And, they're all herbivores initially, huh? Yeah, he could have just made one animal, human beings, and one plant. And yeah, I mean, why did he have to make all kinds of things? Why did he make dogs and cats? I mean, they're both,
So they could fight.
so they could fight. Dynamic tension, right? for effect. But
I was reading this week about some different chimeras that were made in the lab.
oh yeah.
And some, a small percentage of some survive like 21 days or maybe a little more, and others survive so long and then they destroyed them. But is this Satan's attempt to create life?
Well, it's Satan's attempt to destroy and corrupt life. In this movie here.
And then I also read about the 3-person embryo.
Yeah, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. Go back to the chimeras. If you don't know what that is, basically, it's a mix of two dissimilar organisms. And these are things. This is not science fiction. This is actually going on in various parts of the world. China is a big part of this because China can do things in China that you can't do elsewhere in the world. But it's also being done without advertising in more places than you would think. The idea is that you take a mouse and you put inside of that mouse human brain cells, so that you develop a mouse that part of its brain is composed of human brain cells. You remember the old cartoon Pinky and the Brain? Yeah, brings that to mind. This is not science fiction. They actually do this. A pig that has some human cells in it to produce like a human heart, because a human heart's already, pig's heart, very similar to a human heart. There are pigs that have had human genes put into them. And then in addition, there's mice that have had, I believe, I'm trying to think where it came from. I think it came from a phytoplankton of some sort to produce bioluminescence inside. They had mice that literally glowed. Their skin glowed in the dark.
And they're not radioactive.
Yeah.
A jellyfish?
And there's all these kind of things that, now when you're talking about some of them died naturally, it's because the conflict between the two types of cells that are growing in there, in some cases they have to actually use drugs and things to overcome that because it's not natural. So it's not creating life. It's taking two life forms and trying to combine it in order to change life. They would take, for instance, an egg cell or a newly fertilized egg where you have an embryo, and they would actually go in and insert DNA into that's basically what you're doing.
Didn't really make anything better. He just
No.
made things worse.
So what happened is some of the ones that would live, and it's different animals. It wasn't just mice and things like that. There was a lot, and pigs. There was other animals, monkeys with human brain cells in them and things like that. And they would say, well, we'll destroy them before they get too advanced, because what happens if you produce a monkey with human brain cells that begins to act like a person?
Destroy it before it can vote for
Yeah.
But why would they even do it?
Well, that's a good question. One of the reasons is there are people who, it allows us to push the boundaries of what we can and can't do in terms of learning how to do things, learning how genetics work, how DNA works and all that. And they'll give you a song and dance. We're learning and we're advancing, because if we can figure out how to do this, then we can figure out how to improve people's DNA when they have genetic defects that causes problems, eliminate the bad gene. And some of them are genuinely, I think, sincere, but a lot of it, go back to Genesis chapter 6. A lot of it, I think, is the same thing that was going on in Genesis chapter 6. In Genesis chapter 6, where it says, starting in verse 1, it came to pass when men began to multiply in the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty of renown. And
Those are fallen angels. Right?
yeah, the sons of men, sons of God, I believe are angels that would be fallen angels. The Bible talks about the sons of God that rejoiced when they witnessed the creation of the world and all. So that would be fallen angels. And the daughters of men would be human women. And, some people try to say, no, the daughters of men are the line of Seth, and the sons of God, the sons of God are the line of Seth, and the daughter of men are from the line of Cain. They come up with all kinds of things. But no, the simplest explanation is that it's fallen angels and human women. Now, then the question becomes, were the fallen angels able to manifest themselves in a body that was able to father children with these women? Or did they merely possess and control other men, in a sense, in a breeding experiment? And as we've said before, we have selectively bred, for instance, dogs to produce everything from a little Chihuahua to a Great Dane, and infinite varieties and other things as well we've produced. Yes.
Then God got rid of all that when he had the flood.
Mm-hmm.
But when Noah's, so it was this Noah's family with their, his sons were married other women, few women, but what I'm trying to ask you is, how did they have children? Did they travel to a place where there were other people that the flood didn't reach? That they found other inhabitants, or how did they do that?
Well, it's very simple. The Noah, and let me back up here. Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Then it says in verse 9, these are the generations of Noah. That was verse 8. Verse 9, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. The just man refers to his spiritual state, but perfect in his generations, I believe, referred to his physical state. He was not of corrupted DNA because of the deal with the sons of God and the daughters of men. His line was genetically pure, okay, and his sons would have been as well. And we presume, though we don't know 100% for sure, that his sons' wives would have been as well. They all got on the ark. Nobody survived the flood, some hidden pocket of the earth. The Bible says everything with breath in it died. It covered the entire earth. There's a guy.
Did that include the fish that swam in the
Ocean were fine because they're in the water already.
Yeah.
No, we're talking about birds,
ocean?
reptiles, mammals, human beings. That's why the ark was made. If the flood was not worldwide, who is the guy, the astronomer, Ross, is it? I think. Yeah. Who teaches the flood was a regional flood. Well, here's a silly thing. We know of no place on earth that you could account for a regional flood. It would have been like a big, vast area that filled up with water. So Noah and his family are put on this ark, made to build this huge ark and float around for months in a lake, when it would have made more sense to tell Noah and his family, build a wagon train and head over the ridge into the area that's not going to be flooded.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, they're floating around in the lake, and everybody else in the world is going on with life as normal. And somebody kind of comes up on this lake and goes out in a boat, knocks on the door of Noah's ark saying, "What are you guys doing here?" "Well, we're surviving the flood." "Well, why didn't you just come over the ridge and stay with us?" That's silly. The regional flood thing is one of the most foolish concepts that learned people try to justify. Virtually every culture in the world has a flood story. And when I was taking sociology classes, they said the more common and widespread a legend or a myth is, the more likely it's based on actual events, until it comes to the flood, which is a worldwide story. Well, we know that can have no basis in reality. Well, so Noah and his family are on the ark. They're the only human beings left. Every other human being on the planet, probably billions, have now died. The ark settles down. In Genesis chapter 10, we read this. Genesis chapter 10. In Genesis chapter 10, it says this, starting in verse 1. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Unto them were sons born after the flood. There's three men, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Each one of them had a wife, Mrs. Ham, Mrs. Japheth, Mrs. Shem. And they were all on the ark together. And after the flood, they began having children. Apparently, Noah and Mrs. Noah had no more children. But Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they and their wives all had children. And this sons were born after them. As you read through this in chapter 10, that's kind of like the table of nations. All the people who live in the world today came from these three couples. And I was going to say genetics, we've talked about that before. Genetics has proven that everybody on the planet is the descendant of one woman, which the Bible says in Genesis chapter 3, I believe it is, that Eve is the mother of all living. So genetics endorses what the Bible says, that we're all descendant of one woman. But it also says we're all the descendants of one or more of three women who are the descendant of that woman. That would be Mrs. Ham, Mrs. Japheth, and Mrs. Shem. We're all descendant of one or more of them, and they in turn are descendant of Eve. And genetics shows that. Yes.
I'm saying, even like you said, every culture has
Yeah.
its own way of life, but is it not ever inspired about Arabic putting people have gotten up on there?
Well,
They could have made it.
Yeah,
No.
yeah.
Prior to the flood, Everest didn't exist.
No.
That's what I was thinking. 'cause-
And here's the other problem with that. The other problem with that, it says, let's go back to Genesis chapter number 7, I think it is. Genesis chapter 7, starting in verse 17. 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. And the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. Notice verse 19. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. What does that say? Everything was covered. Yeah. No, well, there's 8 people on the ark. But what I'm saying here, this tells us that everything was covered. There was no mountaintop that stuck up above the water.
Verse 20 goes further.
Yeah, 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. Any mountains that existed at that time were all underwater. Now, there's other things that took place during that time. There was the fountains of the deep that were opened up, and there's abundant evidence to indicate that a number of plates of the crust of the earth moved, and they collided with each other. And when what would be the Indian subcontinent moved up in and collided with Asia, it made a massive uplift, not in millions of years, but probably in days, lifted up the Himalaya mountains. And as the waters began to recede and these mountains were being pushed together, they extended up above the waters eventually. Same thing, the Rocky Mountains, the North American plate slamming into the Pacific plate in a matter of days would have produced a Rocky Mountain chain. Yeah, it started during the flood, but during the flood, the waters prevailed 15 cubits above the hills and the mountains. About 18 inches, so it would 15 times that. Yes.
I'm not sure where it is, but Jesus believed the account of the flood.
Yeah.
So if these are Christians debating it, then
Yeah.
they know more than Jesus knows.
Apparently, and also Peter referred to the flood as a fact as well. Yeah. Yeah, no, this is why we do this. And then look in verse number 21. If people survive somewhere, then the Bible is in error. And if the Bible's in error here, then how do you know that's not in error over here where it says you must be born again? It says this in verse 21, and all the flesh died on the earth, both of the fowl and of the cattle and of the beast and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, and all that was in the dry land died. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle and the creeping things and the fowl of the heaven. And they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. So either the Bible is correct on that, and Jesus, as you pointed out, endorsed this, and Peter endorsed this in his writings. So either Jesus and Peter are completely wrong, didn't know what they were talking about, or the Bible is correct. And yeah, yeah.
But I don't know, I think this must be wrong somewhere. It said a timeline of Bible history, and it said that after the flood, and it said that Noah himself went to Asia, to China, and it said that the people there looked up to him like a god. So there was already people there, and
Yeah.
they said that he was
yeah.
the one who invented the Chinese language.
Well, yeah, the only way that there could have been people there that would look up to him is if after the flood, Noah's descendants through Shem, who eventually migrated up into that part of the world, were living there, and Noah, before he died, because he lived a number of years after the flood, if Noah had traveled to China, he would have traveled to a place that was populated with his descendants after the flood.
They
And
were the natives, right?
well, they were natives because they were the first ones to move there. It's like, what is a native? You know, we have this big deal, you know, today you can't call American Indians American Indians. Remember, they had changed the name of a certain sports team in the area from the Indians to the Guardians because somehow Indians was an insulting term, even though it was given that name to honor the American Indians. You can't use the name Indian because the American Indian movement, I'm not making this up, AIM, the American Indian movement said that it's not nice to call them Indians.
They call themselves Indians.
Yeah, well, okay, the Indians. Are the Indians the Native Americans? No, they're not. Anybody heard of the Mound Builders? The Mound Builders lived here before the Native Americans. I'm a Native American because I was born here. I'm a Native American in that sense. The American Indians arrived here after the Mound Builders. The Mound Builders were here before the American Indians. If anybody's going to call themselves the Native Americans, it ought to be the Mound Builders.
Where did the Mountain Builders come from?
Well, they eventually came from Noah's descendants when they got off the ark. Probably there was a land bridge. Well, we know there was a land bridge between Russia and Alaska that crossed the Bering Strait. So they probably came there through that way and down into the Americas that way. Another avenue into Americas from Europe was during the Ice Age. They've shown that as the ice was retreating, there were people who followed the edge of the ice across the North Atlantic into North America. So there's that avenue. The Polynesians are documented to have come across the Pacific, the Southern Pacific. And Easter Island is not that far from South America. And they believe that the Polynesians and their forerunners may have actually moved into South America. So by the time the Europeans got here, you already had an influence of Asians from North Asia and North Europeans coming that way and Polynesians coming this way. And in addition to it, it's believed that Solomon in his day had commerce and trade with the Americas. So there would have been people from the Middle East going there. There's also evidence that in the early day, in that time frame, that there was travel from the British Isles, in particular Ireland, into the northeastern part of America. And of course, then we also know the Vikings traveled around and had colonies in Canada. Huh?
So the Chinese people came from
Shem, yeah. His descendants. It's part of that's some of his descendants. Of course, the Arabs and the Jewish people also are descendants of Shem.
All of them from Shem.
Yeah.
Jewish people were from Shem.
Yeah, because they were from Abraham, and Abraham was like great grandson or something from Shem.
Japheth is like Europeans and Greeks.
Yeah, the Europeans and the Indians from India. Not Indonesian, the India. That was the Indus Valley. That's where India got the name from, the Indus Valley. And so they were a Japhetic people, and as are a lot of the Europeans. But there's a lot of mixing that took place because remember when the Assyrians took the northern kingdom, they took people out, huh?
You mean Israel or Judah?
The northern kingdom of Israel. Yeah.
So what
the Assyrians took people from the northern kingdom up into Central Asia, and they brought people from other parts into the northern kingdom. That's how you got the Samaritans. They were part Gentile and part Jew. There was an intermingling there, and then also when the southern kingdom was taken captive, Judah, and they went into Babylon, the Babylonian captivity. When they left Babylon and returned to Israel, some of them stayed behind, and so Parthia, which was a pretty impressive civilization when you study Parthia. Parthia controlled much of Turkey, not Turkey, Iran, but they're not Persians. The Parthians actually were kind of like the Samaritans. They had Jewish ancestry, and so the Parthians actually followed Jewish genealogies because the leader of the empire had a title called King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And the only person who could have that position had to be certified as a direct descendant of David, King David, to sit on the, huh? No, the Persians are the ethnic people from what would be Iran today. The Parthians ruled over the Persians.
How did they get there? Though? Did they come from the north from Russia?
The Persians?
Or Azerbaijan?
I'm not sure where the Persians came from initially into the area, but they were the main ones there because that's why the name was Persia, because it was named after the people that were there. I'm not sure how they got there initially, but the Parthians partly are a result of the Babylonian captivity and some of the Jews that refused to go back to the land. They stayed there, and they ended up creating an empire it rivaled the Roman Empire. And at the time of Jesus' birth, the Roman Empire and the Parthian Empire had agreed on the Euphrates River as being their international boundary.
Was it Babylonian Empire?
No, Parthian.
Oh, the Jewish remained behind.
Some of the Jewish descendants, but they were like the Samaritans because they were intermingled with non-Jewish people.
So southern Iran.
Well, they ruled over the Persians. Their base of operation was in Persia, but they weren't Persians, and they ruled all the way to the Euphrates River. In fact, a couple hundred years before Christ was born, they actually controlled Bethlehem and Jerusalem. So later on, they were pushed back to the Romans, and the Parthians agreed that we will look at the Euphrates River as being the international boundary so that we're not fighting all the time. Personally, I believe that the wise men that followed the star were Parthian wise men because they followed these things, and it would also explain why Herod and all of Jerusalem was in fear when this large group, because it wasn't just 3 guys on camels. It was probably several hundred people, soldiers, servants, and everything. And they were, from the east. They were probably. And so Herod might have been fearful that Parthia was making a move to Jerusalem and that part of the world because they had controlled it in the past. So, but the Parthians were a very advanced group, but they eventually disappeared. And their empire crumbled, and so they disappeared. They went here, they went there. A number of them went up into Central Europe. Huh?
You could teach a class. If you stayed,
They wouldn't let me. No, I wouldn't be politically correct. I wouldn't be woke enough. But yes.
6th grade world geography, I remember a term, the Fertile Crescent.
Mm-hmm.
Was that around the same area, the Mediterranean?
Yeah, I think it went from if you extend it to the Indus Valley and you come up through the Euphrates Valley over to the Nile, you have this area where they believe that some of the initial civilizations developed because the Indus Valley had the right combination of water and land where they could grow things and climate and everything. Same with the Euphrates. Euphrates, they had they over time developed between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers a number of to keep the land watered so that agriculture could develop. And then, of course, the Nile, the canals and everything, they would trap the floodwaters of the Nile and use to irrigate the land, and they were able to have a pretty extensive agriculture. I forget the technique they used in the Indus Valley. It might have been a system of canals too. I'm not sure.
Interesting,
but-
is that secular history
Uh-huh.
in my geography book in the 6th grade, and yet it conforms with where
Yeah.
the Bible says everything started.
Yeah, because the Babylonian Empire came out of, area. You got the Indus Valley over. Persians, of course, would have been between those areas, and then of course Egypt down there in the Nile and all. And you had a question here.
Yeah, this was a couple months ago, but I had read that the Euphrates was drying out.
Yeah, because
Which is supposed to be
of a series of dams and also I think there's a lack
Yeah,
of rain.
The Rhine River in Germany was really low in water too.
Yeah, there was a lack of rain. That was part of what was going on, lack of rain. But also the diversion. It's just like the Colorado River. Colorado River used to be a pretty substantial river pouring into the Gulf of California there, or Sea of Cortez, whichever you prefer. But and everything that we have, by the time it gets down here, it's almost a trickle. So I just had a
With that freshwater smell.
yeah, I just had a friend of mine from my college days. He lives in Colorado, and him and his family went camping, and they were talking about people kayaking on the Colorado River. I guess hard to do that at the end, but yes.
In Iraq where Saddam
The what?
Hussein.
Oh, Saddam Hussein. Yeah.
went down and invaded. What was it?
Well, he went into Kuwait the first time.
Kuwait.
Yeah.
So, Kuwait, I had read in Genesis about Ur and then Uruk. So is that where?
Ur, the
Ur-
Chaldees.
You are.
Yeah.
I remember in Genesis it says you are spelled.
Yeah. Ur, the Chaldees. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also when Abraham was born, Ur the Chaldees, the Persian Gulf would have been up close to where Ur was. It was probably more a coastal town, but because of sediment and everything like that, it's quite a ways from the water now. It's not a coastal town anymore.
Is that what Kuwait is now? Goes down to the-
Yeah, it's in part of that, I think. I'm not sure exactly.
Supposedly rising, it's now.
Samaria.
Yeah, because of deposit of but no, Kuwait, Iran still has the mouth of the Euphrates into the Persian Gulf, but Kuwait is down below that, and but it's near there. I mean, it borders Iran or Iraq. I'm sorry. Ur would have been in Iran or Iraq today, further up the Euphrates, inland, because as I said, it's sediment, it's filled in. Ur at the time of Abraham's living there probably would have been a coastal city, but now it's not. It's well away from the water now because of sediment filling in the valley there. As the sediment washed out of the Tigris into the Euphrates and from the Euphrates into the Persian Gulf, just like the Nile Delta has expanded out considerably, just like the Mississippi Delta has expanded out considerably. All that silt coming downstream, that sediment settles out. It's that dirt is being deposited there because you wash the dirt down from the hills and the valleys, and it deposits into the water because the water slows down as it comes and it deposits, and it builds up the delta, and that's what's happened with the Euphrates over the centuries. The Euphrates delta, as it were, is much narrower, but it has considerably grown over the
But I
time.
mean the area. I mean
The area.
where Ur was, even if it just got still over. But Ur, that's where Kuwait is, isn't it?
No, I said it's in Iraq. It's in Iraq. It was along I believe it was along the Euphrates River.
But I mean Iraq, but I mean Kuwait wasn't always there. That
No.
was always, Kuwait was man-made country, came there later.
Yeah.
Britain or someone.
Yeah, just like Iraq was a man-made country.
Yeah. So I just.
There's
the
no
area,
there's no
like-
native Iraqi tribe or
Yeah.
Kuwaiti tribe.
Yeah, but I mean the place, even if there was.
But the
no-
place where Ur the Chaldees was would have been in Iraq, not Kuwait.
But there wasn't any Kuwait there.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Not in the same area.
It would not have been in that area. The area that has become Kuwait, where the Chaldees was, my understanding is Ur the Chaldees, the area that is called Iraq today.
But I thought that Kuwait covered the bottom too. It used to be Iraq and then it was.
No.
later called
Well,
Kuwait.
even if
Oh,
it
I
was
see what-
called,
yeah,
even if,
this is what, I see what she's saying.
okay, even if it was Iraq,
I see what she's saying.
it's not on the Euphrates River.
See that, I see what she's saying.
Yeah,
She's
no,
saying
it's-
it because it's close to the
Yeah,
water.
she's got a map here and it shows where Kuwait is, but it doesn't matter because the area where Ur of the Chaldees was is not in the area that's called Kuwait today.
Yeah,
It was along the Euphrates River.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
wanted to know.
Yeah, it was up here, not in Kuwait. Yeah.
It wasn't down near the Gulf, you know?
Well, the Gulf was up here.
Oh, I
The
see.
Gulf would have been
Yeah.
at the time of Abraham. The Gulf would have been up here, and so Ur would no longer be on today. So at any rate, we're after 9. So any other last minute? All right, we can go ahead and close right there. And but yeah, when we get to heaven, it'll be nice to be able to watch. I'm sure God can give us a video of the spread of civilizations where you can. You ever see one of those maps online where it shows the spread of the Roman Empire, the spread of the whatever empire? It would be neat to be able to see how people spread over the earth after the flood. So, all right, let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you again for the opportunity we have to come together tonight. Just pray that you would bless, watch us, keep us safe as we travel home. Pray that you bless the day tomorrow and especially bless the day on Sunday, the Lord's Day, for your glory, Lord. Help us again to be a witness testimony for you. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, let me let me get back here a second, just a second here. All right, well, thanks for watching.